They didn't know I still had a card to play. But let me back up, because you need to understand how I got to the moment when everything changed. When I was standing in that pristine kitchen, oil from a sizzling skillet still burning my ear, watching my own son ask me what I had done wrong. I'm May Armitage. I'm 73 years old, and for 40 years I ran Armitage Bakery on the south side of Chicago. 40 years of getting up at 4 in the morning, 40 years of flour under my fingernails and the smell of yeast in my hair. 40 years of knowing exactly who I was and what I was worth. My husband Walt died last spring. Heart attack while he was trimming the hedges in our backyard, the hedges he'd been fussing over for 22 years. One minute he was there, cursing at the uneven spots, the next minute he was gone. Just like that. 45 years of marriage, ended by a hedge trimmer and a weak heart. After the funeral, after the casseroles from neighbors stopped coming, the house got so quiet I could hear the grandfather clock Walt's mother had left us ticking 3 rooms away. I'd sit at the kitchen table where Walt used to read me the sports scores every morning, and I'd stare at the photo frames lined up on the windowsill. All those pictures of Daniel growing up, of family vacations, of Christmas mornings. Silent witnesses to a life that felt like it had ended with Walt's. That's when Daniel started calling every day. Mom, you can't stay in that big house all by yourself. Mom, what if something happens? Mom, Kira and I have plenty of room. Daniel, my boy, 38 years old and still my baby, even though he stood 6'2" and wore suits that cost more than I used to make in a month at the bakery. He had this way of talking that made everything sound like a done deal, like he'd already figured out what was best for everyone, and we were all just catching up to his plan. So I sold the house, packed up 45 years of life into boxes and suitcases, gave away most of Walt's tools to the neighbor kids, and moved into Daniel and Kira's sleek Chicago condo in Lincoln Park. Glass and steel and clean lines everywhere. Not a doily or a family photo in sight. Call me Kira, she said when Daniel introduced us, like I was some stranger he'd picked up at the bus station instead of the woman who'd given birth to her husband. Not Mom, not Mrs. Armitage. Just Kira, like we were coworkers or something. They put me in the guest room at the end of the hall. The window faced a brick wall 8 feet away. In the morning, if I stood on my tiptoes and craned my neck just right, I could see a sliver of sky between the buildings. That sliver of sky became my lifeline. I tried to make myself useful. I got up every morning at 5:30, just like I had for 40 years, and I'd start the coffee and make breakfast. Real breakfast, eggs and bacon, toast from bread I'd bake myself because the store-bought stuff tasted like cardboard. I'd pack Daniel's lunch in a proper brown bag with a little note, the way I used to when he was in grade school. I'd fold their laundry and organize their closets. I'd scrub their bathroom until the fixtures gleamed. I'd label leftovers in the refrigerator with the date and contents, neat little labels written in my careful cursive. I thought I was helping. I thought I was earning my keep. But nothing I did was right. Nothing. The eggs are overcooked, Kira would say, pushing her plate away. And this coffee is too strong. The bathroom smells like bleach, she'd complain. It's giving me a headache. Mom, you don't need to label everything, Daniel would say without looking up from his phone. We're not running a restaurant here. Not running a restaurant. Right. Because I'd only run a business for 4 decades. Because I didn't know anything about keeping track of food inventory. But I bit my tongue. I smiled. I said, of course, honey, whatever you prefer. Because I was grateful, wasn't I? I was supposed to be grateful that they'd taken me in. I was supposed to be grateful that I wasn't alone in that big empty house, listening to the grandfather clock tick away the hours. The worst part wasn't even the criticism. It was the way Daniel would just sit there, scrolling through his phone, nodding at whatever Kira said like she was reading him the weather report. Like my feelings didn't matter. Like I wasn't even in the room. I'd watch him sometimes, this man who used to run to me when he skinned his knee, who used to beg me to make him my special pancakes on Saturday mornings, who used to tell me I was the best mom in the world. Now he couldn't even look me in the eye when his wife was tearing me apart piece by piece. The micro-humiliations added up. They ate at me like rust on steel. Kira would inspect the dishes I washed, running her finger along the edges like she was looking for evidence of my incompetence. She'd refold the towels I'd already folded, making a big show of how much better her way was. She'd change the channel when I was watching my programs, without asking, without even acknowledging that I might have an opinion about what we watched. And Daniel. God, Daniel would just sit there, scrolling and nodding, like a bobblehead doll in an expensive suit. I started keeping track. Not because I'm petty. Well, maybe I am petty, but not just because of that. I kept track because I needed to know I wasn't going crazy. I needed proof that this was really happening. Day 1. Kira criticized my meatloaf. Too dense, she said. Didn't your generation learn how to cook properly? Day 3. She found fault with how I'd organized the spice cabinet. Alphabetical order is so rigid, she said. I prefer to group by cuisine type. Day 7. Daniel told me I didn't need to get up so early to make breakfast. Kira doesn't eat breakfast anyway, he said. And I usually just grab something on my way to work. 40 years of getting up before dawn, and suddenly my early mornings were an inconvenience. Day 12. Kira decided the guest room needed to be refreshed for when her mother came to visit. She moved my things, Walt's cologne that I kept on the dresser, our wedding photo, the little ceramic bird Daniel made me in 2nd grade, into a cardboard box. Just temporarily, she said. To make space. That cardboard box sat in the closet for 3 weeks. Every night I'd look at it and think about unpacking it, putting my things back where they belonged. But where did they belong? This wasn't my home. This wasn't my room. I was just a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. Day 18. I made pot roast, the same recipe I'd been making for 20 years, the one Daniel used to say was his favorite. Kira took one bite and made a face like I'd served her poison. It's very traditional, she said, which somehow sounded worse than if she'd just said it was terrible. Day 21. I offered to help with the grocery shopping. Thanks, but I have a very specific list, Kira said. I don't want to confuse things. Confuse things. Like I was some addled old woman who couldn't tell the difference between butter and margarine. Day 25. I was folding laundry in the living room while they watched TV. A commercial came on, one of those insurance commercials with the happy families and the golden retrievers, and I mentioned that. Walt and I had that same insurance company. That's nice, Mom, Daniel said, but he said it the way you'd respond to a small child who'd just told you about their imaginary friend. That's when I realized the truth. I wasn't their family member. I was their burden. I was the obligation they'd taken on because it was the right thing to do, because people would judge them if they didn't. I was the cross they bore, the good deed that entitled them to feel virtuous about themselves. But even knowing that, even feeling that humiliation burn in my chest every single day, I kept trying. I kept getting up early and making coffee no one wanted. I kept folding laundry that got criticized. I kept smiling and saying thank you and of course and whatever you prefer until the words tasted like sawdust in my mouth. Because what choice did I have? I'd sold my house. I'd burned my bridges. I was 73 years old with arthritis in my knees and nowhere else to go. That night, the night everything changed, I was making beef stew. Walt's favorite. I'd been simmering it all afternoon, the way you're supposed to, letting the flavors develop and the meat get tender. The kitchen smelled like home, like the dinners we used to have when Daniel was little and the world made sense. I was just plating it up, spooning it carefully into the good bowls, when Kira walked in. She looked at the pot like I was cooking roadkill. "Are you trying to ruin dinner?" she said. Just like that. No, hello, no, thanks for cooking. Just accusation, like I was sabotaging their meal on purpose. What do you mean? I asked, because honestly, I didn't understand. The stew was perfect. It smelled perfect. It looked perfect. She lifted the lid and peered into the pot like she was examining evidence at a crime scene. "It's swimming in grease," she said. "And is that bay leaf still in there? You're supposed to remove those before serving. Someone could choke." I'd been making stew for 40 years. I knew about bay leaves. But I opened my mouth to explain, to defend myself, and she picked up the skillet I'd used to brown the meat. It was still hot from the stove, still had oil in it. "Honestly, May," she said, and her voice had this tone, this dismissive, exasperated tone like I was a particularly slow child. For someone who supposedly ran a restaurant. That's when she turned, and maybe she turned too fast, maybe the handle was slippery, maybe she didn't mean for it to happen the way it did. But that sizzling skillet came around and smacked me right across the ear. Hard. The pain was immediate and shocking. Oil splattered across my cheek, my neck, my shoulder. It burned. God, it burned. I stumbled backward against the counter, my hand flying up to my ear, and I could feel the heat of it, the sting of it. From the den, Daniel flicked the remote louder. Like he couldn't be bothered with whatever drama was happening in the kitchen. Like the sound of his wife hitting his mother with a skillet was just background noise that needed to be drowned out. I stood there, oil dripping down my neck, my ear ringing with pain, and I stared at Kira. Waiting for her to apologize, to look horrified, to rush for ice or a cold cloth or something. Anything. But she just stood there holding that skillet, looking annoyed. Like I was the problem. Like I'd somehow caused this to happen. "Well, don't just stand there dripping," she said. "You're getting oil on the floor." That's when something inside me snapped. Not broke, snapped. Like a rubber band stretched too far, too long. I looked around that kitchen. That pristine, perfect kitchen that I cleaned every day until it gleamed. Every surface spotless. Every dish in its place. Every crumb wiped away. A monument to my insignificance. 5 minutes later, glass was shattering, pans were falling, and I was on the tile floor surrounded by the wreckage I'd made. I'd started with the pot of stew. Beautiful, perfect stew that had been simmering all afternoon. I picked it up. It was heavy, must have weighed 10 pounds with all that beef and vegetables, and I turned it upside down over the sink. Watched that brown gravy cascade down the drain like a waterfall of wasted effort. Then the plates. They're good plates, the white ones with a thin gold rim that probably cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a week. I lifted them up one by one and let them fall. The sound they made when they hit the tile was beautiful. Sharp and final and honest. The pans came next. All those expensive copper-bottom pans that I wasn't supposed to put in the dishwasher because it would damage the finish. I pulled them out of the cabinet and let them thunder to the floor like metallic rain. I overturned the spice rack. Watched paprika and oregano and cumin spread across the counter like colorful snow. I opened the refrigerator and started pulling things out. The leftover lasagna with my neat little label. The jar of homemade pickles I'd brought from my house. The expensive cheese Kira bought at that fancy deli downtown. It all went on the floor. All of it. I was standing in the middle of this beautiful chaos, this liberation by noise, when Daniel finally came in. He stood in the doorway in his perfect suit with his perfect hair, and he looked at the wreckage like he couldn't process what he was seeing. "May," he said, and his voice was quiet, shocked. "What did you do?" "What did I do? What did I do?" I laughed. I actually laughed, standing there covered in oil and surrounded by broken dishes and spilled food. Because that was the question, wasn't it? Not, what happened to you? Not, are you hurt? Not, what did we do to drive you to this? What did you do, May? Like I was the problem. Like I was the crazy one. I made dinner, I said. Just like you wanted. Kira appeared behind him, her face white with shock and rage. She's lost her mind, she said. Look at this mess. Look what she's done to our kitchen. Our kitchen. Not my kitchen. Never my kitchen. Always their kitchen, their space that I was graciously allowed to clean and cook in as long as I didn't get any ideas about actually belonging there. She's unstable, Kira announced to Daniel like I wasn't standing right there. This is exactly what I was worried about. Elderly people living alone too long, they lose their grip on reality. Daniel looked from me to the mess to Kira, and I could see him calculating, weighing, trying to figure out how to handle this situation with the least amount of inconvenience to himself. Mom, he said finally, and his voice had that careful, patronizing tone people use with mental patients and small children. Maybe you need a little break. Some time to process everything that's happened since Dad died. A break. Right. Like grief was something you could get over with a long weekend at a spa. We can get you a hotel room for a few days, he continued. Just until we can figure out a more appropriate living situation. Appropriate. There was that word again. I was inappropriate. My grief was inappropriate. My presence in their perfect life was inappropriate. Kira was nodding enthusiastically. There's a nice place on Cicero, she said. Very reasonable rates. And there are services for people in your situation. Services for people in my situation. Code words for homes for crazy old ladies who don't know their place. Daniel pulled out his wallet and started counting bills. Here's enough for a few nights, he said, holding out the money like he was paying for a service. We'll figure out the details once things calm down. I looked at that money in his hand. Looked at my son, my baby boy who used to crawl into bed with me during thunderstorms, who used to tell me I was the smartest person in the world, offering to pay me to go away. I think it would be best if you were gone by morning, Kira said. Before the cleaning service comes. The cleaning service. Because God forbid they should have to clean up the mess themselves. God forbid they should have to get their hands dirty dealing with the consequences of what they'd done to me. I took the money. Not because I wanted it, but because I needed it. Because I was 73 years old with nowhere to go and no other options. I walked out of that kitchen, out of their perfect condo, and into the Chicago night. The oil was still burning on my ear, still making my skin sting with every step. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the other kind of pain. The kind that comes from realizing your own child sees you as a burden. The kind that comes from understanding that everything you thought you knew about your life, about your worth, about your place in the world, was wrong. The budget motel on Cicero was exactly what you'd expect. Stained carpet, flickering fluorescent lights, the smell of disinfectant trying to cover up things you didn't want to think about. The clerk looked at me like I was some bag lady who'd wandered in off the street, which I guess wasn't far from the truth. The room had a bed with a sagging mattress and a TV that only got 3 channels clearly. The ice machine down the hall was broken. The vending machine ate my dollar bills without giving me anything in return, like everything else in my life. I sat on that bed for 3 hours, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a map of somewhere I'd never been. Thinking about how I'd gotten here. How 40 years of building a business and raising a child and being a good wife and a good mother had led me to this moment, in this room, with oil still crusted on my ear and my son's money crumpled in my pocket. I thought about calling him, apologizing, begging him to let me come back, promising I'd be good, I'd be quiet, I wouldn't cause any more trouble. I thought about swallowing my pride and my rage and whatever dignity I had left, just to have a place to sleep that didn't smell like other people's desperation. But I didn't call. Because even in my worst moment, even sitting in that awful room feeling like the world's biggest failure, some part of me knew that going back would kill whatever was left of my soul. The next morning, I checked out and started walking. I had nowhere to go, so I just walked. Through Lincoln Park, down to the lake, back up through the city. My feet hurt. My back hurt. Everything hurt. But I kept walking because standing still felt like giving up. I found a bench near the river and sat down. Watched the joggers and the dog walkers and the young couples holding hands. Watched the world go by like I was invisible, which I guess I was. When you're a 73-year-old woman sitting alone on a park bench with everything you own in a small suitcase, people look right through you. That's when I met Eddie. He was maybe 60, maybe 70. Hard to tell because the street ages you fast. He was sitting on the next bench over, feeding pigeons with bread crusts from a paper bag. "You look like you could use this more than they can," he said, offering me half his sandwich. Peanut butter and jelly on white bread, the kind Daniel used to love when he was little. I wanted to say no. Wanted to maintain some shred of dignity, some pretense that I wasn't a charity case. But I was hungry, and the sandwich looked better than anything I could afford, so I took it. "Thanks," I said. "Rough patch?" he asked. I laughed, but it came out more like a sob. "You could say that." Eddie didn't push for details. Didn't offer advice or platitudes about how things would get better. He just sat there eating his sandwich and feeding the pigeons, and somehow that was exactly what I needed. I spent that night at the shelter downtown. Stood in line with 40 other people, most of them younger than me, most of them with stories that probably made mine look like a minor inconvenience. The volunteers were kind but tired, going through the motions of caring because caring was their job. They gave me a cot in a room with 12 other women. The woman next to me coughed all night. The woman across from me cried herself to sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of desperation and trying to figure out how my life had gone so wrong so fast. The next day, I tried calling Daniel. The phone rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. What was I supposed to say? "Hi, honey, it's your mother, the crazy one who destroyed your kitchen. I'm homeless now. Hope you're having a nice day." I texted him instead. Simple message, "I'm okay. Hope you are too." I watched the little indicator that showed he'd read it. Waited for a response. Waited all day. Nothing. I sent another text the next day. "Thinking of you." Read, no response. Another the day after that. "Love you." Read, no response. That's when I understood. I wasn't just homeless. I was erased. Deleted. Like I'd never existed at all. I spent 2 weeks in that cycle. Shelter at night when there was space, bench by the river during the day. Soup line for lunch. Library for warmth and somewhere to clean up. Eddie showed up most days, and we'd sit together not talking about our situations. He had been a mechanic before his arthritis got too bad to work. Had a daughter somewhere in California who sent Christmas cards but never called. The thing about rock bottom, he told me one afternoon while we watched the tourists take selfies by the lake, is that at least you know which direction is up. I thought about that a lot. About rock bottom. About which direction was up. About how when you lose everything, you sometimes find things you didn't know you had. That's when I remembered the cookbook. It was an old Betty Crocker cookbook from the 70s, the one I'd learned to cook from when Daniel was a baby. I'd brought it with me from the house, one of the few personal things I'd managed to pack. It was in my suitcase, wrapped in one of Walt's old t-shirts. I'd been carrying it around for 2 weeks without really thinking about why. Maybe because it reminded me of a time when I knew what I was doing, when my cooking was appreciated instead of criticized. Maybe because it smelled like home, like flour and vanilla and all those years of making meals for people who loved me. But that night in the shelter, lying on that uncomfortable cot listening to the woman next to me cough, I opened it. Not to cook. God knows there was nowhere to cook, but just to look at the pictures, to remember what it felt like to create something good. That's when I found the letter. It was tucked between the pages for beef stew, Walt's favorite, the same recipe I'd been making when Kira hit me with that skillet. A manila envelope with my name written on it in Walt's careful handwriting. Inside, a letter and a stack of photocopied documents. May, the letter started, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you're probably going through my things wondering what the hell I've been up to all these years. Walt had never been much for sentiment, but his words on that paper were the most beautiful thing I'd ever read. I know you think I've been wasting time and money on those real estate magazines and investment newsletters. I know you roll your eyes when I talk about property values and market trends. But I've been planning, May. I've been planning for us, for our future, for what happens when the bakery isn't enough and our bodies aren't as strong as they used to be. The photocopies were property deeds, stock certificates, bank statements. A business license for something called Harbor and Finch Holdings, our middle names, the ones nobody ever used. Walt had been buying property for years. Small apartment buildings, mixed-use developments, commercial spaces. All over Chicago. All in our names. All paid for, according to the documents, with money he'd been squirreling away from the bakery's profits for decades. I never told you because I didn't want you to worry, the letter continued. Didn't want you thinking about money when you had a business to run and a son to raise. But I wanted to make sure you'd be okay if anything happened to me. I wanted to make sure you'd never have to depend on anyone else, never have to beg for a place at someone else's table. At the bottom of the envelope was a business card for a banker named William Chin and instructions to call him if I ever needed anything. I sat there in that noisy shelter, surrounded by the sounds of other people's broken lives, holding proof that my life wasn't nearly as broken as I'd thought. That Walt, my quiet, hedge-trimming husband who watched sports and read the newspaper and never seemed to pay attention to anything important, had been paying attention to the most important thing of all. Making sure I'd be okay. The next morning, I called William Chin. Mrs. Armitage, he said, and his voice was warm, like he'd been waiting for my call. I was so sorry to hear about Walt's passing. He was a good man. A very smart man. I found his letter, I said. Good. I was wondering when that would turn up. He said you'd find it when you needed it most. Walt knew me better than I knew myself. Knew I'd turn to that cookbook when everything else fell apart. Knew I'd find his gift exactly when I was ready to receive it. Mr. Chin wanted to meet. There are some things we need to discuss, he said. Some paperwork to sign. Some decisions to make about how you want to manage your holdings. My holdings. Like I was a real estate magnate instead of a homeless woman calling from a payphone outside a shelter. We met at his office downtown. Glass and steel, like Daniel's condo, but warmer somehow. Mr. Chin was younger than I'd expected, maybe 50, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He treated me like a valued client, not like someone's crazy mother who'd lost her mind. Let me show you what Walt built, he said, spreading maps and documents across his desk. It was impressive. More than impressive. Walt had assembled a portfolio worth millions. Apartment buildings in Logan Square and Ravenswood. A mixed-use development in Wicker Park. Commercial spaces downtown. All of it generating rental income, all of it appreciating in value, all of it owned free and clear. Walt was very conservative, Mr. Chin explained. Never leveraged, never speculated. He bought solid properties in good neighborhoods and held on to them. The income has been going into a trust account. There's quite a bit accumulated. Quite a bit turned out to be enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. Enough to never have to depend on anyone again. Enough to never have to take another humiliation from another person who saw me as a burden. But more than that, it was enough to do something about the people who had humiliated me. Mr. Chin introduced me to an attorney named Patricia Patel. Sharp, efficient, probably about Kira's age but with substance behind the polish. She helped me understand my options, my rights as a property owner. The thing about real estate, she explained, is that it gives you leverage. Not just financial leverage, but social leverage. People respect property owners. They have to, because property owners have options. I liked the way that sounded. Having options. The first thing I did was get myself cleaned up. New clothes, not fancy, but well-made and properly fitted. A haircut at a real salon instead of the discount place I'd been going to for 20 years. New glasses to replace the ones I'd been wearing since the Clinton administration. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman who belonged in boardrooms and bank offices. A woman who owned things. A woman with options. Patricia helped me set up the LLC properly, transfer all the assets into the company name. Harbor and Finch Holdings became my shield, my sword, my new identity. May Armitage was a broken-down old woman who'd been smacked with a skillet by her daughter-in-law. The principal of Harbor and Finch Holdings was someone to be reckoned with. I had to learn the business fast. Property management isn't just collecting rent and fixing broken toilets. It's about understanding market rates, tenant rights, maintenance cycles, tax implications. It's about being firm but fair, professional but not cold. Patricia was a good teacher. She showed me how to read lease agreements, how to calculate operating expenses, how to handle problem tenants and problem properties. She showed me the difference between being a landlord and being a property manager, between owning real estate and running a real estate business. Your husband was smart, she said. He bought in neighborhoods that were just starting to turn around. Property values have doubled, tripled in some cases. You're sitting on a gold mine. But I wasn't interested in the gold mine for its own sake. I was interested in what the gold mine could do. See, one of the properties Walt had bought was a mixed-use building in Logan Square. For apartments upstairs, commercial space downstairs. The commercial space was currently leased to a small design firm at way below market rate, a sweetheart deal from the previous owner who'd been friends with the tenant. The tenant was struggling. The design business is tough, especially for small firms trying to compete with the big agencies downtown. They were a month behind on rent, had been for 3 months running. Previous ownership had been flexible, understanding. Hadn't enforced the late fees spelled out in the lease. I wasn't previous ownership. I started researching the tenant. Small firm, 3 employees, specialized in boutique retail design. Their biggest client was a high-end clothing store in River North. Store that happened to be located in a building I now owned. Interesting coincidence. The clothing store was paying below market rent too. Another sweetheart deal from previous ownership. But their lease was up for renewal in 6 months and new ownership, Harbor and Finch Holdings, had different ideas about appropriate rental rates. I had Patricia draft a letter to the clothing store. Professional, courteous, informative. Just letting them know about the change in ownership and the upcoming lease renewal discussions. Nothing threatening. Nothing inappropriate. But the new market rate we proposed was triple what they'd been paying. The clothing store panicked. Started looking for new space, but comparable locations in River North were going for even more than what we were asking. They tried to negotiate, offered to sign a longer lease for a smaller increase. We considered their offer. Carefully. Professionally. And declined. They couldn't afford the new rate. Had to close the store. Had to cancel their contracts with their vendors and suppliers and designers, including the small design firm that rented space in my Logan Square building. Dominoes falling one by one. The design firm couldn't make rent without their biggest client. Fell further behind. I had Patricia send them a notice of default, followed by formal eviction proceedings when they couldn't catch up. It took 3 months. Everything legal, everything by the book. No personal animosity, no vindictive language. Just business. Just a property owner exercising her rights under the terms of a legally binding lease agreement. During those 3 months, I learned something about myself. I learned that I was good at this. Good at seeing the connections, the relationships, the ways that different pieces of a business puzzle fit together. Good at being patient and strategic and thinking 3 moves ahead. Walt had been right about more than just buying property. He'd been right about me. About what I was capable of when I put my mind to it. But I also learned something about fairness. About the difference between justice and revenge. One of the other tenants in the Logan Square building was a 3rd-grade teacher named Maria Santos. Single mother, 2 kids, renting a 1-bedroom apartment for $800 a month, also below market rate, also a sweetheart deal from previous ownership. When her lease came up for renewal, I could have raised her rent to the full market rate. Could have tripled it like I did with the clothing store. Could have forced her out to make room for a tenant who could pay more. But Maria Santos had never hit me with a skillet. Had never made me feel small and worthless and unwanted. Had never dismissed my grief or treated my presence like an inconvenience. Maria Santos worked 2 jobs to support her kids and still found time to volunteer at the food bank where I'd eaten during my worst days. She deserved better than to be collateral damage in my war against people who'd actually wronged me. So when Patricia drafted her lease renewal, I instructed her to phase in the increase over 6 months. $50 a month for the first 3 months, then $100, then $150. Still brought her up to market rate eventually, but gave her time to adjust, time to find the extra money or look for alternatives if she needed to. I even included a note about a potential long-term rate cap if she stayed current on her payments. Loyalty rewarded. Reliability valued. That's unusually generous, Patricia observed. That's fair, I corrected her. Because this wasn't about being generous. This wasn't about being cruel either. This was about being fair. About treating people the way they deserve to be treated based on how they'd treated me. The design firm got evicted in December. I was there for the final hearing, sitting in the back of the courtroom wearing my new glasses and my well-tailored coat. The judge ruled in favor of Harbor and Finch Holdings. Of course he did, because we had the law on our side, because the tenants had violated the terms of their lease, because business was business. I watched them pack up their office equipment, their design samples, their dreams of being successful small business owners. Part of me felt sorry for them. They seemed like nice people who'd just gotten caught in circumstances beyond their control. But that was the thing about circumstances beyond your control. Sometimes you were the victim, and sometimes you were the cause. Sometimes life hit you with a sizzling skillet, and sometimes you were the one holding the handle. The space was released within 2 weeks. New tenant paid full market rate, signed a 5-year lease, put down a substantial security deposit. The property value went up. The cash flow improved. Harbor and Finch Holdings got stronger. And Daniel got an eviction notice. See, Daniel and Kara lived in that beautiful Lincoln Park condo, but they didn't own it. They rented. From a company called Metropolitan Property Management, which managed buildings for various owners throughout the city, including one building owned by Harbor and Finch Holdings. When I discovered this, and Patricia was very thorough in her research, I nearly laughed out loud. Walt's planning had been even more perfect than I'd realized. He'd bought the building where our son lived, probably as a way to keep an eye on Daniel's living situation, to make sure he was in a good neighborhood with good schools nearby for when he had grandchildren. Walt had been such an optimist. Daniel and Kira's lease had been renewed automatically for years, with modest increases that kept pace with inflation, but nothing dramatic. They'd gotten comfortable, complacent. Probably never even thought to ask who actually owned their building. But leases expire. And when they expire, new terms get negotiated. Patricia sent them a letter in January. Professional, courteous, informative. The lease would not be renewed at the current rate. New ownership had reassessed the property values in the area and determined that the unit was significantly under market. The new proposed rent was double what they'd been paying. I wasn't being vindictive. Well, I was being vindictive, but I was also being fair. Comparable units in the same building, same square footage, same amenities, were renting for exactly what I was proposing. If anything, I was being conservative in my pricing. Daniel called the property management company. Tried to negotiate. Explained that he'd been a model tenant for 5 years, never late with rent, never caused any problems. Surely there was room for flexibility, for consideration of his history, for some kind of arrangement that would work for everyone. Metropolitan Property Management was sympathetic but firm. They didn't make pricing decisions. They just implemented the policies set by ownership. If he wanted to discuss the matter further, he could request a meeting with the property owner. Daniel requested the meeting. Patricia called me. He wants to sit down with the principal of Harbor and Finch Holdings, she said. Probably going to make some kind of plea about being a good tenant, about the hardship of moving, about how he's got roots in the neighborhood. Set it up, I said. Are you sure? Once he sees you, there's no going back. No maintaining the illusion that this is just business. I thought about that. About illusions. About the difference between business and personal. About Daniel sitting in his living room turning up the TV while his wife hit me with a hot skillet. There never was an illusion, I said. This has always been personal. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon in Patricia's office. Daniel dressed up for it, wore his best suit, the charcoal one with the pinstripes that probably cost more than most people made in a week. He looked nervous when he walked in, kept checking his phone, straightening his tie. Patricia and I were already seated at the conference table when he arrived. I was wearing my new glasses, my hair professionally styled, a navy blazer that made me look like the businesswoman I'd become. I looked like someone you took seriously. Someone with options. Daniel glanced at me when he walked in, the way you'd glance at any other person in a professional setting. Then he did a double take. Then he went white. Mom, he said, and his voice was barely a whisper. Hello, Daniel, I said. Please have a seat. He sat down like he was moving through thick water. Kept staring at me like I was a ghost, like I'd materialized out of thin air just to haunt him. I don't understand, he said finally. What are you doing here? I'm the principal of Harbor and Finch Holdings, I said. The company that owns your building. Patricia slid a folder across the table toward him. These are the relevant documents, she said. Property deed, corporate filings, lease agreements. Everything's in order. Daniel opened the folder with shaking hands. Scanned the papers like he was looking for some kind of mistake, some proof that this was all a misunderstanding. How, he said. Your father was a very smart man, I said. Smarter than either of us gave him credit for. But you were homeless. You were living in that motel. You were. He trailed off, probably remembering all the things he'd assumed about my mental state, my competence, my place in the world. I was exactly where you put me, I said. Where you and your wife decided I belonged. He flinched at that. Good. Mom, if I had known. You would have what? Treated me with respect? Defended me when your wife was tearing me apart? Actually returned my phone calls instead of pretending I didn't exist. He didn't have an answer for that. Because there was no good answer. Because we both knew the truth. If he'd known I had money, if he'd known I had power, he would have treated me completely differently. But he hadn't known, so he treated me like I was worthless. The rent increase, Patricia said, getting us back to business. Are you prepared to accept the new terms? Daniel looked from her to me and back again. I can't afford that, he said. Kira's business has been struggling, and with the economy the way it is. Kira's business, I said. The design firm. In Logan Square. He nodded. The one that just lost its biggest client because they couldn't afford their new rent? The color drained out of his face completely. That was you too. That was business, I said. Just like this is business. Mom, please. I know things went badly. I know we should have handled things differently. But you can't punish us like this. You can't use your money to destroy our lives. Punish. Destroy. Like holding him accountable for his actions was some kind of cruel and unusual punishment. Like expecting him to pay market rate for his housing was an act of destruction. I'm not punishing you, I said. I'm treating you exactly the way you treated me. Like you don't matter. Like your feelings don't count. Like you're a problem that needs to be solved instead of a person who deserves respect. It's not the same thing, he said, and there was desperation in his voice now. We gave you a place to live. We tried to help. You gave me a room with a window facing a brick wall and made me feel grateful for it. You let your wife humiliate me every day and acted like I was the problem. You threw me out with cab fare and told me to get over my grief. We didn't throw you out. You destroyed our kitchen. You. I what? I leaned forward and my voice was steel. I what, Daniel? He stopped talking. Because he knew. He knew that whatever I'd done in that kitchen was nothing compared to what they'd done to my spirit, my dignity, my sense of worth as a human being. The lease expires at the end of the month, Patricia said. You can accept the new terms, or you can find somewhere else to live. Those are your options. Daniel turned to me one more time. Mom, please. I'm begging you. Don't do this. I looked at my son, my baby boy, the child I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, and I felt nothing but sadness. Not for him. For me. For the mother I'd been who'd raised a son who thought begging was an acceptable substitute for accountability. I'm not doing anything to you, I said. I'm just running a business. Making smart financial decisions. Treating all tenants equally, without personal bias or emotional considerations. But I'm your son. Yes, I said. You are. And when I needed you to act like my son, you acted like a landlord. Now that you need me to act like your mother, I'm acting like a landlord. The meeting ended there. Daniel left without signing anything, without accepting the new terms, without saying goodbye. Patricia and I sat in the quiet conference room for a few minutes, listening to the sound of traffic far below. That was harder than I expected, I admitted. Second thoughts? She asked. I thought about it. About Daniel as a little boy, running to me when he fell off his bike. About teaching him to bake cookies on snow days. About all the bedtime stories and scraped knees and parent-teacher conferences and graduation ceremonies. About 40 years of being his mother. Then I thought about him sitting in his living room, turning up the TV while his wife burned my ear with a hot skillet. No, I said. No second thoughts. Daniel and Kira moved out 3 days before the lease expired. I know because Patricia informed me when they turned in their keys. They found a smaller place in a less expensive neighborhood. Probably had to get roommates to afford it. Probably had to sell some of their fancy furniture to fit into the smaller space. My heart didn't break for them. The unit was cleaned and repainted and back on the market within a week. New tenants moved in at the full market rate. Young professional couple, both doctors, signed a 2-year lease and put down first month, last month, and security deposit without blinking. The building's income went up. The property value went up. Harbor and Finch Holdings got stronger. Kira left for her parents' place in Scottsdale about a month later. I know because Daniel called me from a new number, left a voicemail saying she was gone, saying he was sorry, saying he understood now what they'd put me through, saying he was getting help, going to therapy, trying to figure out how to be a better person. I didn't call him back. Not because I didn't care, but because caring wasn't enough anymore. Because sorry wasn't enough. Because understanding wasn't enough. Because after everything we'd been through, I needed more than words. I needed evidence. I needed proof that he'd actually learned something from this experience instead of just learning how to say the right things to get what he wanted. I used some of the money from Harbor and Finch Holdings to buy myself a house. Not a mansion, not some ridiculous display of wealth, but a nice bungalow in Ravenswood with good light and a garden where I could plant herbs. A place where I could put Walt's cologne on the dresser and our wedding photo on the mantel and that little ceramic bird Daniel made me in second grade. A place that was mine, where no one could make me feel small or unwanted or like I was taking up space that belonged to someone else. I started taking watercolor classes at the community center. Turns out I had a talent for it, or maybe just the patience that comes from years of decorating cakes and getting the details exactly right. I painted landscapes mostly, but sometimes portraits of people I remembered. Walt trimming the hedges. Daniel as a little boy with chocolate cake frosting on his face. Even my mother, who'd been dead for 20 years, but whose smile I could still capture with the right shade of yellow ochre. I volunteered at the shelter where I'd spent those awful nights after Daniel threw me out. The same shelter that had once been too full to take me in. They were always short-staffed, always needed people who understood what it felt like to have nowhere to go. I worked the dinner shift mostly, serving soup and sandwiches to people who looked exactly like I had looked 6 months earlier. Lost. Forgotten. Invisible to the rest of the world. One evening, I saw Eddie. The man who'd shared his sandwich with me when I was sitting on that park bench feeling like the world had ended. He was thinner than I remembered, his coat more threadbare, but he still had that quiet dignity that had made me feel less alone during the worst days of my life. Eddie, I called out as he was leaving with his meal. He turned around, squinted at me, trying to place my face. "Do I know you?" "Park bench by the river," I said. "You gave me half a peanut butter and jelly sandwich." Recognition dawned in his eyes, followed by confusion. "You look different." I was different. Clean clothes, decent haircut, glasses that actually fit my face properly. The uniform of someone who belonged somewhere instead of someone who'd been thrown away. "Things got better," I said. "I'm glad," he said, and he meant it. No jealousy, no resentment that my situation had improved while his stayed the same. Just genuine happiness for another human being's good fortune. I made sure Eddie got fed first from then on. Made sure he got the best portions, the warmest soup, an extra dinner roll if we had them. Made sure he knew that his kindness to me when I had nothing hadn't been forgotten. Because that's the thing about rock bottom, about losing everything and having to rebuild from nothing. It teaches you the difference between the people who matter and the people who don't. Between the ones who see your humanity even when you're at your worst, and the ones who only see your value when you have something they want. Eddie mattered. Maria Santos, the third-grade teacher, mattered. The volunteers at the shelter who worked for nothing but the satisfaction of helping people, they mattered. Daniel. Daniel was going to have to prove he mattered. And I wasn't going to make it easy for him. He called again in March. Left another voicemail. Said he'd been working nights at a shipping warehouse, trying to pay down his debts. Said the therapy was helping him understand how selfish he'd been, how wrong he'd been to treat me the way he did. Said he missed me. I listened to the message 3 times before deleting it. Not because I didn't miss him too. I did. I missed the little boy who used to help me frost cupcakes at the bakery. I missed the teenager who would tell me about his day at school while I cooked dinner. I missed the young man who called me every week during his first year of college, homesick and lonely and needing to hear his mother's voice. But I didn't miss the man who had sat in his living room turning up the TV while his wife abused me. I didn't miss the son who had paid me to disappear instead of standing up for me. I didn't miss the person who had treated my grief like an inconvenience and my presence like a burden. If Daniel wanted his mother back, he was going to have to earn her. He was going to have to prove that he understood the difference between saying sorry and being sorry, between feeling bad about consequences and feeling bad about actions. He called again in April. This time he didn't leave a voicemail. Just let it ring until it went to my machine, like maybe he was hoping I'd pick up, hoping we could have a real conversation instead of him talking to a recording. I stared at the phone while it rang, my hand hovering over it, and for a moment I almost answered. Almost gave in to the maternal instinct that wanted to comfort my child, to forgive him, to pretend that everything was okay between us. But everything wasn't okay. And pretending wouldn't make it okay. It would just teach him that he could treat people badly as long as he felt sorry about it afterward. So I let it ring. In May, he tried a different approach. Sent me a letter instead of calling. Real letter, written by hand on actual paper, delivered through the mail like people used to do before everything became digital. The return address was a studio apartment in a part of town I didn't recognize. Not a bad neighborhood, but not Lincoln Park either. Somewhere in between. Somewhere people lived when they were trying to get back on their feet after falling down. I almost threw the letter away without opening it. Almost decided that I wasn't ready for whatever Daniel had to say, wasn't ready to risk letting him back into my life just because he'd learned how to write a pretty apology. But I opened it anyway. Because he was still my son. Because 40 years of loving someone doesn't just disappear, even when they break your heart. Dear Mom, the letter started, and just those 2 words made my chest tight. I know I don't deserve a response to this letter. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness or your time or even your attention. I know that everything that's happened to me, everything I've lost, is exactly what I earned through my own actions. I've been going to therapy twice a week since Kira left. Learning about things like emotional abuse and enabling and the difference between intent and impact. Learning that it doesn't matter what I meant to do if what I actually did was hurt someone I love. I hurt you, Mom. I let Kira hurt you, and then I hurt you more by not defending you, by not protecting you, by not being the son you deserved. I told myself I was being neutral, staying out of the conflict, but there was no neutral. There was just right and wrong, and I chose wrong. I know saying sorry isn't enough. I know that actions matter more than words. But I wanted you to know that I understand now what I didn't understand then, that you weren't the problem in that house. We were. Kira and I. We were the problem. I'm learning how to be a better person. It's hard work, and it's slow going, but I'm trying. I got a job working nights at a shipping warehouse. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work, and it pays enough to cover my rent and my debts. I'm learning what it feels like to actually earn what I have instead of just expecting it to be handed to me. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to call me back or write me back or acknowledge this letter in any way. I just wanted you to know that I think about you every day. I think about all the ways I failed you, and I'm trying to become the kind of person who wouldn't fail you again. I love you, Mom. I know I didn't show it when it mattered, but I do love you. And I'm sorry. For all of it. Your son, Daniel. I read that letter 5 times. Sat at my kitchen table in my sunlit bungalow, surrounded by the herbs I was growing on the windowsill, and read it over and over until the words blurred together. Part of me wanted to believe it. Wanted to believe that Daniel had really changed, that he'd really learned something from losing everything, that the son I'd raised was still in there somewhere underneath all the selfishness and entitlement. But another part of me, the part that had been forged in the fire of those awful weeks when I had nothing, wasn't ready to trust. Wasn't ready to risk being hurt again by someone who had already proven he was capable of hurting me. So I put the letter in a drawer. Didn't throw it away, but didn't answer it either. Filed it under maybe someday and went back to living my life. My life, which had gotten pretty good by then. Harbor and Finch Holdings was thriving. I'd bought 2 more properties, both small apartment buildings in up-and-coming neighborhoods. Patricia had introduced me to a property management company that handled the day-to-day operations while I focused on the bigger picture strategic decisions. I was good at it. Better than good. I had an instinct for real estate, for seeing potential in properties that other investors overlooked. I understood neighborhoods, understood the rhythms of urban development, understood how to balance profit with social responsibility. I wasn't a slumlord. I maintained my properties well, treated my tenants fairly, charged market rates, but not above market rates. I was firm but not cruel, business-minded but not heartless. When tenants fell behind on rent because they lost their jobs, I worked with them on payment plans. When they had legitimate maintenance requests, I responded quickly and professionally. When their leases came up for renewal, I raised rents in line with market conditions, but not vindicatively. I was becoming the kind of landlord I would have wanted to have when I was younger and struggling. The kind Walt would have been proud of. But I was also the kind of landlord who didn't give second chances to people who had already proven they couldn't be trusted. The kind who understood that forgiveness was earned, not given. Which is why when Daniel called again in June, I finally picked up the phone. "Mom?" His voice was different. Smaller somehow. Less sure of itself. "Hello, Daniel." I didn't think you'd answer." "Neither did I." Silence for a moment. Then, "Did you get my letter?" "I did." And what?" Is there any chance we could maybe have coffee sometime? Just to talk." I thought about it. About coffee shops and conversations, and the possibility of letting him back into my life. About the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. About whether enough time had passed, whether enough growth had happened, whether enough trust could be rebuilt. "I don't know," I said finally. "I'm not ready for that yet." "Okay," he said, and he didn't argue. Didn't try to convince me or negotiate or push for something I'd already said I couldn't give. Maybe someday, I agreed. We hung up after that. But it felt different than the previous calls, the previous attempts at contact. Less desperate on his part, less angry on mine. Like maybe we were both learning how to have boundaries. How to want things from each other without demanding them. That conversation, brief as it was, felt like progress. Not forgiveness. Not reconciliation. Not a return to the way things used to be. But progress toward something new. Something that might be better than what we'd had before, because it would be built on truth instead of expectation. On respect instead of obligation. I'm still not ready for coffee. Still not ready to sit across from Daniel in some neutral public space and pretend that everything is fine between us. Because everything isn't fine. Maybe it never will be completely fine. But I'm not as angry as I was. The rage that carried me through those first months, the fury that fueled my transformation from victim to victor, has settled into something calmer. Something more like resolve. I found my steadiness, and I'm keeping it. I'm keeping the boundaries I've built. The life I've created. The knowledge of my own worth that came from losing everything and discovering I could survive it. I'm keeping the understanding that respect is earned, that love without respect is worthless, that family is about behavior, not just biology. I'm keeping Harbor and Finch Holdings and the financial independence it represents. The power to never again be at someone else's mercy, never again have to accept treatment I don't deserve because I don't have anywhere else to go. I'm keeping the herb garden and the watercolor classes and the volunteer work at the shelter. The life I built for myself, by myself, without anyone's permission or approval. And I'm keeping the door open, just a crack, for the possibility that someday Daniel might prove he's worthy of being let back in. Not the Daniel who turned up the TV while his wife abused me, but a different Daniel. A better Daniel. A Daniel who understands that being someone's son doesn't entitle him to anything except the opportunity to earn his place in that person's life. Maybe that Daniel exists. Maybe the therapy and the warehouse job and the studio apartment have created him. Maybe the consequences of his actions have taught him something about the consequences of other people's actions. Maybe he's learned empathy the hard way, through loss and humiliation and the gradual understanding of what it feels like to be powerless. Or maybe not. Maybe he's just learned how to say the right words. Maybe he's still the same selfish person he always was, just with better vocabulary and a more compelling sob story. I don't know which Daniel is real. But I don't need to know. Because I'm not dependent on his growth or his goodness or his love for my happiness anymore. I have my own life now. My own purpose. My own steadiness. And that's enough. Whether Daniel ever becomes the son I deserved or not, I have become the woman I was always capable of being. Strong. Independent. Unbreakable. They thought they had broken me when they hit me with that skillet and threw me out onto the street. They thought they had won when they reduced me to nothing, when they made me invisible and disposable and desperate. They were wrong. I didn't break. I just learned what I was really made of. And what I'm made of is steel wrapped in flour-dusted hands. What I'm made of is 40 years of getting up before dawn and building something from nothing. What I'm made of is the kind of love that doesn't quit, even when it's not returned, and the kind of strength that grows in the dark places where nobody thinks to look for it. I'm made of the same stuff Walt was made of when he spent decades quietly building our future without needing credit or recognition for it. I'm made of the same stuff my mother was made of when she raised 6 children through the Depression without ever letting them see her despair. I'm made of steel and stubbornness and the particular kind of fury that comes from being underestimated by people who should have known better. They didn't know I still had a card to play. But I did. I always did. I just had to lose everything else to find it. And now that I've found it, now that I know what I'm capable of when I'm pushed too far and written off too easily, I'm never letting it go. I found my steadiness. And I'm keeping it. Forever.